Glitches are bad. For a game developer or casual player, that is. Most folks want their games to be solid front to back with no unexpected surprises that might tarnish the experience. Speedrunners are weird. We love glitches. We've played our games of choice so much that the casual experience has nothing left to offer, and so we dedicate our time to finding the most incomprehensible nonsense you've ever seen in those games, essentially manifesting our own free DLC and completely changing the gameplay experience. Tons of glitches, though, are essentially useless towards pursuing the goals of progression that the game intends to lay out for you. A speedrunner might still delight in finding something stupid, like being able to set a cocoa on fire in your hand and create a whole speedrunning leaderboard around doing that as fast as possible, and then 35 people agree it's funny enough to participate in. But that's not going to get you to the end of the game. The most prestigious speedruns are the ones whose goals align with those of the casual experience. Complete 100% of the game. Finish all the dungeons. Reach the end of the game as fast as possible. These are all concepts that lay the foundations for some of the most famous and competitive speedruns that exist. But finding glitches to help with those is trickier. These are the glitches developers try hardest to not introduce in the first place, and ones that QA departments try hardest to find and report. The casual experience is king, and if a glitch could get in the way of that, then most of the time it doesn't make its way into production, or even gets patched out afterward. That leaves speedrunners fighting to find those special glitches that are well hidden enough to have slipped by, but still have some utility toward playing the game faster. And most communities will have maybe a handful of game-breaking bugs that help them cut big chunks off their times. But not Ocarina of Time. We have dozens. Basically every large glitch we've ever discovered, and there are quite a few, has a major use in some of our most important speedrunning categories. For longer categories that play more of the game, like 100% or all dungeons, of course any new discovery has a higher chance of finding some possible use just by nature of there being more content in these runs to mess with. But for the fastest category, any percent, the opposite is true. The goal of this run is to reach the end ASAP with no regard for how much or how little of the game's content you see along the way. For a speedrun like this in any game, the chances of a new glitch helping out are pretty low, and as time goes on and the run gets shorter and shorter, these chances plummet even further. For Ocarina of Time, the history of any percent's route progression highlights a really amazing fact. We are lucky. Unbelievably lucky. Every time a new major discovery was found, it wormed its way into the fastest way to beat the game. This just doesn't happen. So stick with me and let's take a look at the absurd luck Ocarina of Time speedrunners and glitch hunters have been blessed with throughout the game's history. Our story begins in the early 2000s. One of the first people to play the game all the way through with a timer was Mike Damiani. From 2003 to 2005, he would post a few runs which were completely glitchless, truly just playing the game as intended, but fast. The most exploitative tricks in this run are simple things like stun locking some bosses, a few clever uses of Pharaoh's Wind to skip backtracking in dungeons, this sequence to get the water level back to the 3rd floor a bit early in Water Temple, skipping the Zora Tunic and Lens of Truth, and using Longshot to skip the need for a fire source in Shadow Trial. This run did all 8 main dungeons, Gerudo Fortress, Ice Cavern, and all of Ganon's Castle, basically everything needed for a regular playthrough. This was a great foundation to build on, just a person who was familiar with the game doing it all in one go. The time was right around 5 hours. For perspective, the modern speedrun that completes all this same content under the same restrictions, glitchless all main quests, clocks in an hour and a half quicker. So suffice to say these old runs had room for improvement, and especially so from the perspective of it being the fastest way to beat the game overall. The big roadblock in that regard was there just being so much content. Playing through it all, even by modern standards of skill, takes 3.5 hours. So to improve that, we'd have to be lucky enough to find a way to cut some of it out. And at the very end of the game, we had our first major stroke of luck. The lower floor of Ganon's Castle is a zone we call the Trials. 6 separate themed sequences of rooms that test all of the skills you've built across your journey and use nearly all the major items you've collected. It takes a while to get through it. So let's just not. Lucky us, the developers accidentally flagged this wall as a loading zone that takes you directly to the final tower climb, just like the intended loading zone behind the barrier does. So we can just go put Link in a tight space where he's both above the wall, as is needed to trigger loading zones, and below the damage barrier that surrounds that central column. And the trials are no more. This is just weird, though. Why would this wall be a loading zone? Well, there's a pretty solid theory, actually. When you're escaping the collapsing tower after defeating Ganondorf, there's a small map that's meant to replicate the Trials area, just before running outside to the final Ganon fight. Here we see an oddity. A little alcove in the wall that corresponds to the one that has the accidental loading zone on the actual Trials map. So it's likely that this is an old version of this zone's collision that got copied over and never changed to match the updated real one. So the theory goes that this wall actually did used to have the entrance to the central tower here in this alcove, but they just forgot to remove that loading zone property when reshaping the polygons. Pretty lucky. But that still leaves a ton of content in the rest of the game. So what exactly are the bare minimum requirements for reaching the end? Well, of course, we've got to beat the 3 child dungeons as Child Link to get the spiritual stones, so that we can open the Door of Time and become Adult Link, so that we can beat the 5 adult dungeons to get the medallions, so that Zelda will appear to give us the light arrows for defeating Ganondorf, and so that the Rainbow Bridge appears giving us access to Ganon's castle. Or not. In 2006, players discovered a pretty surprising fact. These things are useless. Turns out the only requirement for Zelda to give you the light arrows is to get the Shadow and Spirit medallions. Forest, Fire, and Water don't count. So just like that, 3 whole dungeons fall off the list. Incredibly lucky. And this isn't even a glitch, it's straight up the way the game is meant to work. But actually there's a problem. Shadow Temple is way up there. And the way you're supposed to get up there is by playing Nocturne of Shadow, a song you only learn after, beating Forest, Fire, and Water temples. So the devs figured since you need these to get to Shadow and you need Shadow and Spirit to get light arrows, the chain of dependencies would require them all. Would require them all. But hey, lucky us, they put a walkable path straight to the dungeons surrounding the whole map. And lucky us, they put a perfect little platform to jump up to that path with nothing but a damage boost. A bean and a bomb. That's all you need to skip 3 whole dungeons back in 2006 and beat the game in under 3 hours. Alright, we're warming up pretty well now. What stars will align for us next? Well, soon after, in the late 2000s, the game's wildest glitch yet was discovered. It's actually a pair of glitches, 2 sides of the same coin. Bottle Adventure and Reverse Bottle Adventure, BA and RBA. Click the links in the description for my deep dive explanation videos on how these work. But all you need to know for our purposes now is that these glitches proved unimaginably lucky in how powerful they are, when there was every possible chance that they could have been completely useless. When catching or emptying a bottled item, the game updates the bottle on the equipped button to reflect the new contents. It also has an algorithm to determine which bottle in your pause menu, your actual inventory, to update to match. This algorithm breaks, however, if the bottled item was on the B button instead of C, possible via a number of smaller glitches. The end result is that the new bottled item gets written to other places in your inventory instead of where it was meant to replace its own previous contents. And this new location is completely controllable by the value of the item equipped to C right. There are a fairly limited number of items we can equip to C right. Therefore, there are an equally limited number of places we can erroneously write our glitched bottle in memory. But the places we do happen to have access to are some of the most useful places we could have chosen. If the devs had arranged memory differently, this might have turned out a total dud. But with very little overhead to acquire the necessary C-Right items, we can do crazy things like create a bomb bag, quiver, or strength upgrade straight out of thin air. We can grant ourselves an infinite sustainable source of ammo for many weapons. We can give ourselves heart pieces, songs, and even medallions and spiritual stones. With the trade quest's Broken Sword on C-Right, our bottled item value will be written to a bit field for flagging our medallions on and off. But bottled item values are only in the range 20 to 32, and of those, only a handful can be filled and emptied at will from the B button. That means only the medallions that happen to line up with these 4 bits could ever be turned on with RBA. And wouldn't you know it, lucky us, 2 of those 4 happen to be Shadow and Spirit. And oh, didn't I mention? The trigger for having Zelda give you light arrows isn't actually beating Shadow and Spirit temples, it's simply having Shadow and Spirit medallions. A bottled bug on the B button and a broken blade. That's all you needed to skip the only 2 remaining adult dungeons back in 2008 and beat the game in under 2 hours. And as a little bit of lucky icing on our already heaping serving of lucky cake, the trade items that we get along the way to the Broken Sword are also useful in making this run even faster. RBA with the Poacher Saw gives us Zelda's Lullaby for free so that we can get magic to shoot at light arrows. Another lucky bit alignment where it could have just as well been any other song at that spot. Kajiro RBA gives us a quiver for free, allowing us to hold the arrow that we'll use to shoot a light arrow at Ganondorf. Kajiro RBA also gives us a bomb bag for free. But a snag. we can't actually collect any bombs without the bomb slot in our inventory being filled. Well, lucky us, when you become Adult Link, the C buttons automatically equip the bomb icon from nowhere even if you don't have any bombs, and we can RBA that to fill the inventory slot. The other two default adult equips, Ocarina and Deconuts, do not do this. Lucky us that bombs do. So now we have bombs for fast traversal, Zelda's Lullaby without ever touching Child Link's otherwise mandatory lengthy side quest to meet the princess herself, and all the keys to acquire and use light arrows against Ganondorf. Whew, this is beginning to feel preordained. Are we getting punked? Well, there's nothing left but the 3 child dungeons in terms of requirements resembling a casual playthrough. Surely these are safe, right? I mean, there's this giant impenetrable stone slab in the way. The Door of Time, the only thing separating the common public from the key to the Sacred Realm, and the only thing separating players from what would surely be one of the biggest sequence breaks in all of gaming. Surely they made sure this roadblock was safe from our shenanigans. Surely they... What's this? A crack in the door. A literal hole straight through to the other side. Nintendo, it's just a big rectangle, for goodness sake. You had one job. Well, lucky us. It takes no dungeons to beat Ocarina of Time. We can just go right to the Master Sword. Well, actually, I guess there's still the Deku Tree. We can't leave the forest until we... Alright. No dungeons it is. But at least you still need a sword and shield to get out of the forest like Mido wanted you... Well, at least you're still forced to get an Ocarina before going out into Hyrule... At least you still need a sword... Okay, we're lucky. We can just do whatever. Alright, so the route is now escape the forest, skip the Door of Time, get magic and light arrows by filling out their prerequisites with some trade quest RBA, then go straight to Ganondorf and Ganon, all in under an hour. So much stuff has already worked out more favorably than most speedrun communities could ever dream of. Could we even get any luckier? Oh, you sweet summer child, we are in 2008 on this timeline. You ain't seen nothing yet. 2012 saw the next massive glitch discovery, Wrongwarping. Players learned that leaving a map via an unexpected exit at the same time as certain kinds of cutscenes were attempting to begin would cause you to end up in a completely different map than both the one you began in and the one the cutscene meant to take you to. The destination of these wrongwarps is completely determined by whatever order in which all the map entrances happen to be pre-arranged in the big entrance table that lives in memory. An arrangement that doesn't have much rhyme or reason to it and was surely just an artifact of the order in which these entrances were developed back in the 90s. All of that to say, Wrongwarping isn't a magical go anywhere I want glitch. With the method available to us, we were only able to initiate one from a select few places and only go to a select few warp destinations from those. What I'm trying to say is, we got lucky. Stepping in the blue ring of light at the end of the Fire Temple queues up a cutscene which attempts to take you to Kakariko Village. But if we instead forcibly exit to Zora's domain via the expiring eyeball frog timer at the right moment, we would warp directly to the game's credits sequence. A brand new way to beat the game that doesn't even need to beat the final boss. Now hold on, you say. Beat the game? This? Well, for the purposes of speedruns, yes. Our goal is to reach the end screen at the end of the credits, and Ganon is just the intended way to do that. But just like beating the Deku Tree is an intended prerequisite to leaving the forest, there's nothing stopping us from bypassing Ganon and heading straight to our goal beyond. So now at the cost of adding back our completion of Fire Temple to the route, Wrongwarping was lucky enough to grant us our first method of skipping Ganon, Ganondorf, Ganon's castle, and the entire dependency tree that comes from needing light arrows at all. We need the eyeball frog, of course, which is quite deep in the trade quest. Further even than the broken sword we were using to RBA the medallions a moment ago. But hey, lucky us, we don't need to do the trade quest. On the original 1.0 release of the game on N64, if you talk to King Zora as Adult Link with any trade item at all, such as the first egg you get from the Cocoa Lady, and you just hold R so that Link crouches when receiving what should be the Zora tunic, you introduce some delay in King Zora's attempt to give you the tunic, and you end up with the eyeball frog instead, skipping a massive trade quest. Oh, and that ice that you need to melt with blue fire to speak with King Zora in the first place? You can just magic it away by bringing up a text box while King Zora loads off screen on the room transition midway up the stairs. So just like that, with nearly no dependencies at all, you can become Adult Link and head straight for a wildly convenient Wrongwarp to the credits in under 40 minutes. But that wasn't the only gulp of liquid luck that Wrongwarping would grant us. In fact, not even 2 months later, we realized that our credits warp was barely even a high card in the face of the royal flush of what came next. The time has come, my friends, to talk about Ganondorf, one of the most famous glitches in gaming, largely because of how stupidly, ridiculously, impossibly lucky it is that it exists at all. The existence of a Wrongwarp glitch is already something special, but for that glitch to have an application that takes you directly from the first dungeon in the game minutes into your playthrough to the final boss sequence, it's just not even believable at this point. The blue warp tries to take you to Kokiri Forest, but if you instead just leave to the Deku Tree basement via the door at the right time, tower collapse. Notably and crucially just past the Ganondorf battle, which would require light arrows and the entire chain of dependencies that comes along with them. From here to the end, all you need is the Master Sword, baby, which we don't have. Except, say it with me now, lucky us. We do, in fact, have the Master Sword. Or we will. Ganon, nice guy that he is, creates one from the ether when he knocks it out of our hand at the start of the battle. Not 30 seconds before the final blow where it's needed, we pick it up off the ground and finish the game no problem. Wake up, Deku Tree, King of Evil. We're down to a run that's under 20 minutes now. Remember at the start how I said as the run gets shorter, the chances of new discoveries being able to impact what little content remains plummets dramatically? Keep that in mind as we talk about the other absurd ways that we got lucky even after this. Now, I've gotten a bit ahead of myself. I should mention that in order to interrupt the blue warp at the end of a dungeon and attempt a wrong warp in the first place, we needed an ocarina. But ocarinas can't be used in boss rooms, likely for exactly the reason of avoiding these shenanigans. But luckily for us, with a bottle that we can empty and refill at will, and any item that Link can hold in hand, we can do a glitch that simulates an ocarina and break free of the blue warp's influence. And so this new Ganondorf wrong warp route required a pit stop in Kakariko Village to grab the bottle reward for collecting Cuccos. A bit of an unlucky detour, if you ask me. Seems like we need a new stroke of luck to remove it. 2015. Get Item Manipulation, GIM for short. By a handful of obscure methods, we can interrupt the mini cutscene of picking up a new or important item overhead. If we then jump into water and surface from below, we'll finish receiving that item. This is because if you pick up an item underwater normally, Link will be stuck in the currently receiving an item state until he surfaces. By getting stuck in that state yourself, surfacing from water is just a clever way to get unstuck and finish receiving the item. This process is called GetItemDelay. But the magic happens if you go stand in front of a treasure chest while in this state of receiving an item. Proximity to treasure chests naturally prepares Link to receive an item by changing his get item value ahead of time. So by approaching a chest while Link is in a state of GetItemDelay, we can change the item he has delayed his acquisition of. Then when we surface from underwater to complete the glitch, it will be something completely different. The only variable to determine the resulting item here is the contents of the chest you touch. Most chests result in completely useless things, like an extra Deku Stick or Deku Nut. Compound that with the fact that you need the chest, deep water, and a method of getting GetItemDelay, all in a space not separated by any doors, since Link is unable to use doors while in the delay state. Considering all of that, there's just no hope that GIM could ever amount to anything more than a theoretically interesting bug, right? Maybe useful in a niche challenge run designed for the purpose of showing it off. Certainly not in something already as tightly optimized as a sub-20-minute any % run of one of the most popular games of all time. No, there are at least 3 different ways of doing GetItemDelay inside the Deku Tree alone. There's water in there are huge open spaces between rooms freely traversable without any doors, and in those spaces there happen to be 2 treasure chests, the dungeon map, and a recovery heart. And wouldn't you know what those 2 chests give you if you touch them when performing GIM? Light arrows and a bottle. This surreal confluence of ultra-perfect conditions means we don't have to detour to Kakariko Village for a bottle any longer. We just head straight for the tree, wish upon a star for a bottle to appear, and proceed on to the wrong warp. Light arrows aren't useful here, but that is useful in many other speedruns. A method of obtaining them only a few minutes from a fresh file is just so lucky. I have to drive home the point. There are very few places in the game where GIM can be made to have much of a real use. It blows my mind that the Deku Tree is not only one of the places, but that the item you get from it is the literal only one that could have made the game any faster at that point in its history. Just under 17 minutes is where this tech took us. And yet, our luck had still not run out. In 2019, we discovered the Motherlode, the glitch of all glitches. Tech that allows you to rewrite the game from the inside out using nothing more than your inputs on the controller. Stale reference manipulation was born. I'll link to a great primer from Fig on how it works in the description, but this is truly the holy grail of glitch hunting for any game science community. The fact that it exists at all is already hitting the lottery, but could we really be so audacious as to hope that it could be simple and fast enough to improve our already bare-bones route? After all, what could we even do with it? Find a way to force it to be possible from within the tutorial area and then credits warp directly from Cookery Forest without ever stepping foot elsewhere? I mean, that's just comical, right? Three minutes and 47 seconds is where we stand today. It would take me an hour to properly convey to you how insane it is that SRM worked out as it did with such convenience for any percent. So I will, but not right now. It's going to take a very dedicated separate video to do that, and I've got it cooking at this very moment. Drop me a sub if you're still here, I'd really appreciate the support, and I'll see you soon for the history of OOT any percent with SRM.